Welcome back. I want you to imagine a world where the government suddenly steps in and mandates that your workplace is legally restricted to using electricity only 3 days a week.
Just 3 days.
Yeah, just 3 days. Imagine the streets in your neighborhood plunged into semi-darkness to save power. Your television broadcasts are forcibly shut off every night at exactly 10:30.
And you're waiting in line to be issued World War II style ration cards just to put petrol in your car.
Exactly. It sounds completely dystopian.
It really paints a picture of a society enduring some kind of massive wartime siege, or, I mean, maybe dealing with the fallout of an apocalyptic natural disaster. You definitely wouldn't immediately associate those conditions with a modern, peacetime Western democracy.
Right, but this isn't a dystopian novel. Today's deep dive takes us right into the heart of the year 1974 in Britain.
A fascinating year.
It is. We're pulling from some incredibly detailed historical analysis, charting what is widely considered the absolute worst year in modern British political history.
Without a doubt.
This is the story of the collapse of the post-war social consensus, the dramatic downfall of Prime Minister Edward Heath, and a nation that honestly, genuinely felt like it was coming apart at the seams.
The contrast with the Britain we know today is just, it describes a society completely wobbling on its axis.
Yeah.
You have this interminable series of labor strikes, a looming energy crisis, and a really pervasive sense among the establishment that basic law and order might simply evaporate.
So the mission of our deep dive today is to extract the vital lessons from all of this chaos.
Because there are a lot of them.
So many. We want to look at what happens when a highly structured, technocratic leader collides head-on with the messy, unpredictable reality of human nature, labor disputes, and honestly, some of the worst international luck imaginable.
It serves as the ultimate historical case study in the limitations of pure logic when you're dealing with millions of anxious human beings.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really understand the crisis of 1974, we have to set the scene of early 1970s Britain. I saw in the notes that the country had spent the couple of decades since the Second World War retreating from its empire. But supposedly, that wasn't even the primary cause of the domestic anxiety.
That is a crucial point. The retreat from empire, this massive loss of global prestige, it actually happened with remarkably little domestic fuss.
Really?
Yeah, it barely registered as a major election issue. The real trauma happening beneath the surface was economic. The nation that was effectively the first to industrialize in the world was now becoming the first to aggressively deindustrialize.
So you have these massive structural economic shifts happening. Heavy industries are closing down.
Slowly but surely.
Unemployment is ticking upward, and inflation is starting to become this looming shadow over the working class.
Precisely. It's exactly the environment that breeds deep voter anxiety.
Yeah.
The public had previously voted in Harold Wilson's Labor government in the 1960s to modernize the economy, but that didn't yield the promised utopia. So by the 1970 election, the electorate decided to roll the dice on a very different kind of modernizer, the Conservative Party leader, Edward Heath.
Now, on Heath's background to be absolutely fascinating.
Oh, he's such a unique figure.
Because he wasn't your typical aristocratic conservative leader of that era, was he? He wasn't born into grand estates or inherited wealth.
Not at all. He was from Kent. He was the socially insecure son of a highly skilled carpenter and a mother who had worked as a lady's maid.
A lady's maid.
Yeah, and that creates a very interesting psychological dynamic. A lady's maid in those grand aristocratic houses was always caught in a liminal space.
Meaning somewhere between the working class servants' hall and the upstairs aristocracy.
Exactly. And you can see that ambivalent class position playing out in Heath's own life.
He definitely seemed to overcompensate. He adopted these incredibly patrician habits.
Ocean yachting.
Taking up ocean yachting, playing the classical piano at a concert level,
Yeah.
and even deliberately altering his accent when he got to Oxford so he would sound more upper class.
What's fascinating here is how that highly curated upbringing forged his political identity. From childhood, he was treated as this flawless prodigy.
The golden child.
Exactly. He had a special homework chair. He never had to help with the household washing up. His family even named their dog ERG.
After his initials?
Edward Richard George. Yes. He was effectively raised to believe his intellect was the absolute center of the universe.
Which naturally leads to his governing style. A newspaper profile from the time that actually praises his computer mind.
That phrase perfectly encapsulates his philosophy. Heath was a pure technocrat. He viewed the national economy the way a programmer views a giant mainframe.
Just inputs and outputs.
Right. He genuinely believed that if you gathered the right experts in a committee room, analyzed the graphs, and just typed in the exact right policy plan, the country would function perfectly.
To be fair to Heath, isn't that what we usually say we want? I mean, we are constantly complaining that politicians are too emotional, too performative, and not logical enough.
On paper, yes, you want a logical leader. The problem wasn't his reliance on data. The fatal flaw was his total blind spot for human nature.
He missed the human element.
Completely. He was essentially a frustrated civil servant who had somehow become prime minister. He didn't want to engage in messy political persuasion. He believed that once he deduced the logical solution, everyone else should just naturally fall in line and obey it.
And when they didn't, his lack of interpersonal skills really showed, with memorable anecdotes about his staggering rudeness.
No, they are legendary.
He would go to formal dinners and just sit there in absolute silence, refusing to make small talk.
My favorite anecdote regarding his total lack of empathy occurred on a flight.
The Brandy story.
Yes. The plane hit severe turbulence, violently throwing a female journalist to the floor of the cabin.
Terrifying.
And Heath's immediate reaction wasn't to check if she was injured. He just yelled, "Bring brandy!"
Thinking quickly in a crisis.
You'd think so, but when the flight attendants managed to bring a glass, he drank it entirely by himself while she was still picking herself up off the floor.
He just drank it himself. That is unbelievable. And he even categorized his own party's members of parliament using a string of 3 very colorful profanities.
It highlights a bizarre dichotomy in his character. We should be clear that Heath was exceptionally brave in a physical sense.
Right, the military background.
In the 1930s, he traveled to the Nuremberg rallies. He actually met Heinrich Himmler.
Wow.
And noted in his diary that the architect of the SS had a limp and moist handshake.
That is a detail.
He was machine gunned by a nationalist plane while observing the Spanish Civil War, and he commanded artillery units in World War II.
So he's storming beaches and fighting panzer divisions in his youth, but by the time he's prime minister, he completely lacks any degree in people.
That's the tragic irony here. He possesses immense physical courage but zero emotional intelligence. He simply doesn't understand what motivates the average anxious citizen.
That brings us to his economic policies, which suggest were essentially a ticking time bomb.
Very much so.
Heath decides to tackle inflation using a rigid top-down strategy he calls the Stage 3 incomes policy. Essentially, he tries to legally mandate exactly how much money people are allowed to earn.
A literal cap on wages.
Right. Capping pay raises across the country at £2.25 a week, which was about 7% at the time.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the fragile state of the economy he was trying to regulate. Before implementing Stage 3, Heath's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Anthony Barber, had initiated something the press dubbed the Dash for Growth.
Wait, let's unpack the Dash for Growth. That was essentially the government printing and pumping massive amounts of credit into the economy to force expansion, right?
Exactly. The government drastically eased lending restrictions. They created this massive artificial credit boom,
Just flooding the zone with money.
pumping money into the system to artificially lower unemployment. But doing so heavily primed the economy for severe inflation. So you have this overheated, volatile economy, and Heath slaps this rigid 7% wage cap on top of it.
But to get the trade unions to actually agree to this strict cap, he includes a sweetener in the policy, something called threshold payments.
This is where the math goes wrong.
The mechanics of this seem crazy in hindsight. It was a promise that if inflation rose above a certain level, everyone's pay would automatically rise along with it.
It was a mathematical feedback loop built on pure hubris. Heath's economic models predicted inflation wouldn't go up. But if it did, those threshold payments would create a doomsday mechanism.
Because it triggers a cycle.
Exactly. If inflation hits the threshold, wages automatically go up. When wages go up, companies raise prices to afford the new wages. That raises inflation further, which triggers another automatic wage increase.
And meanwhile, he's trying to negotiate this with a labor landscape made up of about 1,000 fragmented trade unions.
All intensely competing with one another for membership.
Right. If one union accepts the cap, another tries to break it to look stronger. It's like trying to negotiate with a hydra.
A hydra sitting on a mountain of easily available credit. And all of this policy preparation collided with the worst possible timing in October 1973.
The Yom Kippur War.
Yes.
When that conflict broke out, the OPEC oil-producing nations announced a massive embargo and a 70% hike in the price of global oil.
That external shock completely obliterates Heath's carefully constructed computer models. It injects massive, uncontrollable inflation directly into the British economy almost overnight.
It must have been chaos.
It was as if the whole country had suddenly awarded itself a 20% pay rise.
And because of those threshold payments Heath promised, that inflation triggers automatic pay bumps across the country 11 times in just a few months.
11 times.
The very policy he designed to control inflation ended up turbocharging it into a hyperinflationary spiral.
Which brings us to the primary antagonist of Heath's government, the National Union of Mine Workers, or the NUM. With global oil suddenly unaffordable and restricted, domestic coal became the absolute lifeblood of the British economy.
It was the only way to keep the lights on.
The only way to keep the power stations running.
Knowing they literally have the country's power grid by the throat, the miners demand a massive 35% pay raise, completely shattering Heath's Stage 3 limits.
It wasn't even close to the 7% cap.
And the political theater behind the scenes of this strike is just absurd.
It's a psychological chess match. The union was led by a man named Joe Gormley, who was publicly spearheading this militant demand. But privately, the revealed Gormley was actually feeding information about his own union's strategies to Special Branch.
Just to clarify for our listeners, Special Branch is the intelligence and counterterrorism unit of the British police force. So the leader of the union is actively informing on his own members to state intelligence.
Exactly. Gormley was a moderate who was terrified of the radical factions within his own ranks. Namely, his deputy, Mick McGaughey.
Who was an explicit, card-carrying communist.
Yes, McGaughey didn't just want a pay raise, he wanted a revolution.
Heath finally sits down in Downing Street to negotiate with the union leadership. Heath just sits there mutely, looking miserable.
Just completely silent.
Finally, he asks McGaughey what he actually wants, and McGaughey flat out tells the Prime Minister to his face, "I want to see the end of your government."
It's the ultimate nightmare for a technocrat. Heath is trying to argue about decimal points and productivity metrics, and the man across the table is telling him, "I don't care about your math. I am here to destroy you."
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Heath is backed into a corner. He refuses to break his Stage 3 wage gap. But he also has to conserve the rapidly dwindling national coal supply.
He had to do something drastic.
His solution is one of the most drastic peacetime measures in modern history, the 3-day week.
Initiated at midnight on New Year's Eve, 1973, it was a logistical sledgehammer. Commercial consumption of electricity was legally restricted to 3 specified days a week. Offices were mandated by law to keep their heating below 63 degrees Fahrenheit.
The cultural impact is wild. Television broadcasters like the BBC and ITV were forced to shut down their signals at 10:30 at night just to save power.
People just staring at blank screens.
They banned sports stadiums from using floodlights, which is actually what led to the birth of Sunday daytime football matches in Britain.
The bleakness of the situation even reached the monarchy. Heath actually intervened to censor the Queen's annual Christmas broadcast.
The Queen's speech.
Yes. She had drafted a message addressing the severe difficulties the country was facing. But Heath forced her to edit it out, fearing it would damage national morale.
So instead of addressing the crisis, the Queen just showed pleasant footage of Princess Anne's recent wedding while the rest of the country sat in the dark.
What's crucial to understand about the 3-day week is the profound paradox at its core. If you look at it strictly through Heath's computer mind perspective, the policy was a triumph.
Because it worked on paper.
It successfully conserved the coal reserves, the power grid didn't collapse, but politically, it was an absolute unmitigated disaster.
Because the public didn't react the way his models predicted. He wanted the public to suffer the power cuts, get angry, and turn that anger toward the striking miners.
But human psychology doesn't work like a math equation, because the blackouts weren't quite as apocalyptic as the government threatened.
And frankly, because Britain experienced an unseasonably warm winter that year.
Right. The public felt the government had vastly hysterically overreacted. Rather than blaming the miners, they blamed Heath for plunging them into darkness over what seemed like pure stubbornness.
This almost festive defiance among the public. People weren't rioting against the unions. They were playing board games by candlelight.
Making the best of it.
Radical, left-wing city councils deliberately left their municipal streetlights blazing just to, as they put it, bring down capitalism.
And we have to note, many ordinary citizens actually harbored deep sympathy for the miners. Mining was an incredibly dangerous, brutal job.
And essential.
And the miners had largely been left behind economically during the affluent boom years of the 1960s. The public saw a rigid prime minister fighting working-class men who just wanted a fair wage for dangerous work. Now, as a quick reminder, we are looking at this through the lens of the historical sources. We aren't taking a stance on the union demands versus the government policy here.
Absolutely. We are just conveying how the public perceived the situation at the time.
And speaking of public perception, my favorite detail highlighting this bizarre public mood comes from a psychologist writing in the Daily Mail.
Oh, this is great detail.
He literally published a column suggesting that couples use these freezing, powerless days trapped at home to experiment in their sex lives. It underscores how utterly Heath misread the room. The crisis he manufactured to create outrage instead generated a sort of blitz spirit camaraderie that entirely excluded him.
And to really underscore how far Britain's prestige had fallen on the world stage during this self-inflicted chaos, the Swadan dictator, Idi Amin.
A masterful piece of geopolitical trolling.
Idi Amin publicly launched a Save Britain Fund.
Amin wrote open letters offering 10,000 Ugandan shillings from his own personal savings. And he genuinely offered to send a lorry load of fresh vegetables to rescue the starving British people.
The British government tried to maintain a dignified silence, but the press ran with it. For the British public, seeing a former colony's dictator openly mocking their economic predicament was a profound international humiliation.
It really was.
It just hammered home the feeling that the systemic foundations of the country were broken.
And those foundations really were cracking, starting at the very top. The psychological toll on the government apparatus was immense. Edward Heath was absolutely exhausted.
And unwell, right?
Yes, he was suffering from an undiagnosed thyroid condition, causing him to visibly swell up and gain weight. And he would frequently just sit completely mute during critical crisis meetings.
But the collapse of the technocratic mindset is best symbolized by Sir William Armstrong. Tell us about his role and what happened to him.
Sir William Armstrong was the head of the civil service. In the British system, he is the ultimate behind-the-scenes Mandarin. His entire career, his entire identity was built on calm, rational, bureaucratic procedure.
He was the high priest of Heath's technocratic religion.
Precisely. And the stress of this illogical, messy human conflict completely broke him.
Literally broke him. He suffered a spectacular nervous breakdown.
A very public one.
Thus locking government officials in rooms and frantically ranting at them about communist infiltration, the end of the world, the Bible, and sex.
It's a tragic unraveling.
In one particularly shocking incident, he allegedly stripped naked and lay on the floor while addressing the governor of the Bank of England.
It perfectly encapsulates how this supposedly flawless technocratic machine short-circuited when faced with raw, unpredictable human conflict. He had to be sent home for medical recovery.
That is astonishing. The avatar of government rationality losing his mind because the system wouldn't behave logically.
And what makes this history a true tragedy is that Heath actually had an off-ramp, but his personality wouldn't let him take it.
A lifeline was offered by Len Murray, the highly educated head of the Trades Union Congress, or the TUC.
The TUC is the umbrella organization that tries to herd the cats of the fragmented union movement. Murray was a pragmatist. He went to Heath and offered a deal.
Which was?
Give the miners the money they're asking for to end the blackout crisis. In return, the TUC would publicly declare the miners a special case due to the unique energy emergency. And they promised no other union would use this specific raise as an excuse to demand equal pay hikes.
So why on earth wouldn't Heath take that deal? It solves his immediate coal crisis. Even if the TUC breaks their promise later, Heath could use that betrayal as massive political ammunition against them.
Because Heath viewed political compromises as intellectually grubby. To his computer mind, the Stage 3 policy was the law, and the law was logically sound. Agreeing to Murray's deal meant admitting his model was flawed.
He couldn't compute a compromise.
He didn't want to maneuver politically. He wanted the unions to simply submit to his master plan. He completely lacked the flexibility to recognize a strategic retreat.
Having entirely run out of ideas and refusing to bend, Heath takes a final, desperate gamble. In February 1974, he dissolves Parliament and calls a snap general election.
The ultimate test.
He frames the entire campaign around a single dramatic question for the British public. Who governs? the elected government or the miners.
He genuinely assumes the public will look at the situation, recognize the chaotic communist rhetoric of union leaders like McGahey, and overwhelmingly choose the logical order of his government.
But the tragic irony of the public's response to who governs was effectively, well, clearly not you. The electorate did not give Heath the mandate he demanded, and he ultimately lost power.
It was a resounding rejection of his approach.
So what does this all mean? Let's summarize this incredible narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Edward Heath's downfall wasn't just a story about terrible luck with the Yom Kippur War and the global oil crisis.
Though that external shock certainly lit the fuse.
At its core, this was the failure of a pure technocrat. He believed human beings could be programmed, managed, and regulated like code in a computer.
And that is the crucial takeaway for you, the listener. It doesn't matter if you are managing a small team, running a massive corporate division, or just trying to navigate complex relationships in your personal life.
The human element is always there.
Always. A perfectly logical, flawlessly structured plan is practically useless if you fail to account for human unpredictability, emotion, and self-interest. He thought logic alone could win an argument against working-class men who felt economically desperate and undervalued. He learned the hard way that you cannot spreadsheet your way out of a human crisis.
It's a historical lesson that feels incredibly relevant today. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've talked about what happens when a human tries to act like a computer to manage people.
Right.
But think about the flip side. If you found yourself in a high-stakes leadership position tomorrow, facing a massive crisis triggered by forces totally outside your control.
Like an oil shock or a sudden market collapse.
Exactly. Would you rigidly stick to your meticulously researched, perfect master plan to weather the storm? Or would you be willing to throw out the entire rule book and sit down to negotiate with the very people actively trying to bring you down?
A very uncomfortable question for any leader.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep questioning the consensus, and we will catch you next time.